Welcome to Peace in Math. This is going to be a quick video on how to simplify square roots of negative numbers. So let's say you had to simplify the square root of negative 9. Well, if you had to simplify the square root of positive 9, that would give you 3. If it's the square root of negative 9, this just gives you 3i. And so where this comes from is I'm going to split up this square root of negative 9. I can split that up as square root of positive 9 times square root of negative 1. Multiply these, we get negative 9. And if I simplify square root of 9, that gives me 3. And square root of negative 1, that's defined as I. So this is just a definition. Square root of negative 1, we just define that as I. So another example, let's say I had square root of negative 25. Square root of positive 25 would give me 5. And if this 25 is negative, square root of negative 25 gives me 5i. And let's say we had square root of negative 14. If I was simplifying this, I can split this up. Square root of positive 14 times square root of negative 1. And square root of 14, that can't be simplified, so it's going to stay as is. And then the square root of negative 1, we define that as I. And then how we write this, we're going to put this I right in front of the radical. So it's I times square root of 14, or I rad 14. So the main thing you need to remember about having a square root of a negative number is you're going to have an I in your answer. If it's a perfect square, just square root it, put an I at the end. But if it's not a perfect square, think of it like you're taking this negative out of the radical and replacing it with an I out front. And then just always make sure that this radical can't be simplified any further. So let's take a look at one where you can. Let's take a look at the square root of negative 48. So if I simplify this, I'm going to take the negative out of the radical, replace it with an I, and then I have square root of positive 48. And it's not simplified completely because this radical we can simplify and break that down a little bit. So I can split up the square root of 48. I can split that up as square root of 16 times 3, and I'm choosing 16 since that's a perfect square, because square root of 16 gives me 4. Square root of 3 can't be reduced, so that's going to stay rad 3. And I'm just going to bring down this I that we had at the beginning. And then how we write this I is going to go right in front of the radical, so this would be 4i rad 3. And rad 3 can't be simplified any further. Another way to reduce the radical 48 is using a factor tree method. Let's say I didn't recognize 16 went into 48, but it's even, so I know I can do 2. So you can do this doing a factor tree, so I could do this as 2 times 24, and then 2 is prime, so I'm going to circle that because it can't be broken down any further. 24 we can split up, you could do 6 times 4, I'm going to do 2 times 12, and then 12 you can split up, you could do 3 times 4, and 3 is prime, so I'm circling that, and then 4 we can split up as 2 times 2, and both of those are prime. And then now if you're doing the factor tree method, what you're looking for, since this is square root, is I want pairs of numbers. So here's a pair of 2's, so that means I'm going to have a 2 outside of the radical. Here's another pair of 2's, so that means one more 2, and we're multiplying these because all this is multiplication. And then there's 1 3 left over, so that's lonely, hug it with the square root that remains under the radical since there's nothing to pair it up with. And so if I multiply the numbers out front, 2 times 2 gives me 4, so there's another way to get to that 4 rad 3 that we had earlier. If you need help simplifying radicals like this, check out my video on simplifying square roots and radicals to give you some extra examples if you need. Okay, so the main thing you need to remember about simplifying square roots of negative numbers is you're going to take this negative out of the radical, replace it with the I out front, so now you have square root of a positive number. And then if this radical can be reduced, reduce it. If it can't, then you just leave it as is. I hope this video helped you understand simplifying square roots of negative numbers, and hopefully this helped you find a little more peace in math. Thanks for watching. Till next time.